All right, we are right at the time mark, but we'll give a couple more minutes to let the folks join. I don't see Leaf here today. I am not sure why. Okay, I think we should get started. All right. Welcome everyone to Tigress Working Group Interim Meeting. My name is Prachi Jain, and Leaf, unfortunately, looks like couldn't make it today. So we'll go back and check with him. But here's the note well. Please note the note well, as they say in ITF land. For remote participants, please try to use your headset. If you're not speaking, you're not sharing, keep your video and audio off. And then for the agenda today, I'm going to hand it over to the authors right after this, and they're going to go through the draft updates they have made. I know there have been a lot of chat going on the mailing list, so we'll try to clarify some of that today, and we'll go from there. So I'll let, and if you are willing to help me take minutes, it's a thin crew today, I understand, so if anybody is willing to help me out with notes, please do. I shared the link to the notepad in the chat. With that, Casey, do you want to get started, or is Dimitri or Brad? Okay, all right. So I'll give it to you. I'll go ahead and share your slides.
Great, thank you.
And I'll pass you the control as well.
Awesome, perfect. Okay, so thank you all so much for joining. Definitely, as Prachi said, we've been getting a lot more discussion over our email thread, so we really wanted to just do a quick interim meeting before the next IETF to kind of drill down on some of these pieces that have been discussed. So let's see. Sorry. Okay, so here is our agenda. So we're just going to do a quick review of what we've been working on since the last IETF meeting, talk about the high level of the updates of a requirements document, the updates to our threat model document, and then a quick review of some of these new documents we've created. I think our goal is to spend the majority of the time really on those requirements and threat model documents that we'd had the most commentary on in previous meetings, and kind of nail down anything that might be controversial, and hopefully maybe we can do a vote for adoption for those two documents, nothing else. All right, with that, I'll just start diving in. At a high level, the work we've done since IETF 115 was mainly addressing feedback on requirements in the threat model documents. In addition, we worked on some one-pagers that were about alternate suggested approaches for how we could solve Tigress. So the point of those particular documents was not to say we need to choose one of these exact directions, but more of a thought experiment to understand, could these alternate solutions that were suggested or existing solution kind of match our requirements? For us, that was really, really helpful, and we'll talk about that more at the end. Okay, so high-level update to the requirements. We got a lot of feedback basically about making them more generic and taking out pieces that were not considered to be part of an IETF requirements document. So things like user interface related requirements were all taken out. And we also made them significantly more generic and added an example diagram for some additional context for what we were trying to solve. So that was the high level, and now we'll focus on talking through individual requirements. I think first we talked through some hopefully uncontroversial ones, and I was hoping to spend some of this time kind of showing the slide, letting you all read, and then maybe getting feedback. So certainly feel free if you want to start addressing comments. So I'll just give everyone a couple minutes just to take a look at this slide and just read through. And if anyone has comments on these particular ones, again, we think these ones are uncontroversial, so I wasn't anticipating too much talk, but certainly feel free to raise your hand. And I'll also let Dimitri and Brad take ownership of this section. They worked really hard on the requirements.
So I see Eric raised his hand. Eric?
Yeah, so I think I agree with these, but I guess I'm a little noticing number one, in that how would one not meet that requirement? And I guess I'm hiding under that word a little bit.
So I'll take the blame for that one. That was in the original document, and I think we got some feedback that it was self-evident because everything we do at IETF is cross-platform. But I guess my view is that doesn't hurt to have it in there just in case to abuse anyone of any thoughts counter to that.
Okay.
Yeah,
I guess what I want. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Well, I guess what I wonder is there a stronger version of that requirement? In particular, we had some conversation during both meetings and offline about about situations in which you require that the device is at a TPM in order to be able to participate in this protocol, right? And so, and so I guess I guess there's one say different platforms, but there's no say any platform. And I guess I guess I'd be more comfortable, frankly, if they said across any platform, not against different platforms. Because that's why I think that's the sort of thing that worry is hiding behind this.
That's really solid feedback. We should probably open an issue and discuss what the core requirement, like hardware requirements or feature requirements, in order to be able to support this are. And I actually can foresee language saying that some credentials require a TE or SE or TPM or some hardware of that sort. And for that, the credentials having that requirement, but the transport itself probably does not need that.
I totally agree with that. We probably need to clean the requirements documents, removing on non-essential aspects. But for this particular meeting, we wanted, since we've received a lot of questions previously, we just wanted to provide more information. And I'm totally open to remove it again.
Thanks, Edward. Any other comments on the hopefully uncontroversial requirements? If not, we'll move on to the next one.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. Obviously, anyone that has thoughts, we can always go back, but we'll just start moving on for the time.
This one got some discussion of the clarification we're trying to get at is the goal of this working group is to define a protocol that works for sharing a credential from one user or one device to another device. It doesn't preclude the protocol supporting sharing from one to many, but it's not part of the core requirement to support that. Of course, that is open to discussion if folks feel strongly otherwise.
Go ahead, Eric.
You want me to just jump in here, drive everyone? I think I agree that fine to support one-to-one. So I think that the commentary I agree with. I think that the text I'm less sure about. I think the word limiting is the word I'm fixating on. Is are we required? Is the requirement that protocol should have mechanisms to stop group sharing, or really does not need to do group sharing? And if so, what would limiting mean, and what mechanisms mean? In particular, is it supposed to stop me, you from sharing to me, and then me to other people? Like what exactly? But if it's just like, oh, it only has to work between two people, like that's really just it's like varying the requirements that we are responsible for scripting it one-to-one, but I think we figure out how that.
Eric, you
can
were
help address that.
breaking up.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, good, Casey. I thought maybe it's just me.
No, I was having a little bit of trouble hearing you as well, Eric, but I think I understand your point. I think the piece that you were discussing, and I don't think we have a solution to this, is when, like, if you were trying to share to one person, if they continue to share it down a loop. I don't think from all the solutions we've kind of discussed, I don't think we've generally talked about too much of that. Like how would you be able to prevent that? And we've also talked about that as like friendly fraud. Like, should we actually even try to prevent that? The piece that I was trying to change this requirement to be is basically saying, like, if you have a use case where what you're sharing is a one-time token using the Tigris transfer protocol, if that only works like one time, I was hoping that whatever solution we come up with allows you to not read once, for example. Even if the transfer solution allows for a group share, I just wanted to make sure for use cases that that token is only valid once, that we could make sure that for example, like the mailbox is gone or something like that, whatever the solution is. So yeah, that's what I was thinking. More like whatever you're transferring, if the material that's being transferred only works once versus the material transferred can work for a group, I just want to make sure that we could account for both use cases with the transfer mechanism. Let me know if that helps.
Yeah, I think some. I guess I'm a little reluctant. I mean, it seems like a fine objective of a protocol, but I'm really reluctant to think about imposing that on the relay server if there is one, because now you get into questions about what happens if data gets lost in transmission, or two-phase commit or two generals. Get into questions with the end-to-end argument. So I guess it seems like if the protocol is supposed to enforce that, like, I think that's plausible. But I think if we expect the intermediary to enforce that seems concerning as a design requirement. So maybe there's some way to generalize that. But I think I think it's also, I think, maybe a question of like, is this the right place to locate it, as opposed to in the sort of protocols that we are carrying. But again, I don't think it's necessarily a problem. I'm just trying to I just don't want to impose I don't want to impose a requirement that we're going to have a lot of trouble meeting that we get to it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm sorry, go for it, Dimitri.
Sorry, go ahead, Casey.
Oh, yeah, okay. So I was just going to say that's a really good point, and I think I've been thinking about it as a requirement, but in a sense, it's just an additional security item, or like an additional way for, say for our use case, we only have like single shared share or person-to-person sharing. In a sense, to your point, the intermediary server helping enforce that is kind of like an additional piece, but it shouldn't be its core responsibility, and really like the end should be the one enforcing that. So I think you're totally right. This could be completely removed.
Just to add to that, we were trying to build our requirements to a simple use case where we send credentials from one device to another. Since the group sharing will certainly add complexity, and we just don't want to address it yet. So we want to use this as a stepping stone for possible future extensions, if it makes sense.
I think we can. I don't think it's like, I guess, like, I don't want to I know I'm like nitpicking a lot, but I should say, like, I don't think we're not like contract.
Becker, you kind of trailed off at the end there for me.
Sorry, let me try again. I said, I think as long as that seems like a reasonable thing to say. I think as long as we're agree on the
Eric, it's really hard to hear you right now. We all are having trouble.
We can probably continue offline through emails and move on with the slides.
Yeah, can I just ask Ecker if you wouldn't mind final view on this so we can take the discussion there?
So this is next one, requirement privacy.
I think this for privacy.
If you advance, I just note that we this was the requirement in the submitted version, but the editor's copy updated. I think actually Dimitri cut a new version last night as well. But if you advance, you see what the actual text is today.
I think the next two slides contain the difference with the original requirement statement. Yeah, so we decided to break it down to three portions, the three statements. First, about preventing correlating users, exchanges, or creating social graph. And then intermediary server not being an arbiter of identity. And finally, the user identity shall not be collected. And we are kind of not certain, like we wanted to remove that requirements if the first two objectives can be reached without the third. Right. Is that correct?
I think the key thing here is that the protocol itself can't do anything about the collection practices of the participants. It can only collect what, or it can only prevent information being transmitted. So that was the purpose of that edit, to remove the non-collection requirement and rely on the fact that the data that's being shared with the participants via the protocol does not allow for correlation.
Okay. Any comments on this? All right. I guess we can move on. Standard trust. Again, back to the previous requirements. There should be certain level of trust between the device originating the sharer and the intermediate server if the solution includes intermediate server. And that's important for a number of reasons, which we discussed in the past. And I see Eric wants to share his opinion. I know there was a discussion through mailings.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess, I never found any of the arguments why it had to have to be very persuasive, and it has pretty negative privacy consequences. And so, I guess I'm sort of like, I mean, maybe we end up here, but like, I'm not sure why we have to. There are lots of systems which support like a lot of data moving around in the world at very high cost and doesn't take it. So I guess I'm like, I guess I even there's a very low data requirement here. I'm like really thinking why we have to have like very aggressive, aggressive. And I think this in good standing thing, I think it's like terrible. And I think how we got this.
Right. Again, I'm not sure whether I understood the question here, but we certainly can discuss it either over mailing group or in the chat.
I think it sounded like the bulk of the question was around like, does the sender really need to trust the relay server and vice versa? And then some of the things like the in good standing, what does that really mean? How's that enforceable?
I think that
Yeah.
what it comes down to is this really a requirement?
I think the underlying question, whether we trust the content originated on the device or not. Because like relay server, since we do not enforce a requirement about strong authentication, we don't know who's actually sending the data, who's actually creating shares, right?
But what is the what is that trust buying you? Is the key bit? What are you trying to
Right.
protect?
I mean, like when this was first presented, right? The sort of the model that I heard described was that I'm going to SMS some link to somebody or iMessage it or whatever, right? And then they're going to click on it, and this back and forth is going to happen, right? And so, like the relevant trust relationship is that the user like the person who sent them the message in the first place. It's none of this stuff about the relay server, which the user has no relationship with at all. And so, who is being protected by this, like, by this requirement? And I just don't see that it is, right? And like in particular, like I mean, I assume the way this works is that this link has some declaration on it that like says now engage like Apple Wallet, and Apple Wallet pulls it up and does some like nonsense, right? And like that's where the protection comes from, not like the relay server is not bogus. And to flip it around to talk about the relay server trust in the user trust in the relay server, like that's what the encryption is for. So I guess like this, I just like, I'd be much happier if the relay server were like a completely untrusted part of the system for the purpose of our security analysis.
Right. It's a hard task. So if the strong authentication is out of picture, right? How do we establish the fact that the URL that I receive from someone is a like reliable URL, and I'm not being a target for a phishing attack? And the only way here, if not using strong authentication, such as the one like with TLS protocols, let's say clients like authentication, etc., or any other forms of strong authentication, would be certain level of trust established between all the actors. And
So Dimitri, may I?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. May I suggest we remove this requirement and articulate any threats that you are trying to mitigate with it in the threat model, and think through the possible mitigations for that. And if in the end of going through that process, if the only mitigation we come up with is some sort of trust relationship, then the requirement can go back in. But I think there's, at this point, significant doubt as to whether this requirement is a core requirement.
The goal of this requirement is relay server protection, not user protection. Just saying that the relay server needs to have some way to trust the sending device. And it's not really trust, but just know that the sending device is allowed to create mailboxes, really to prevent a bad actor from just...
So it's an anti-abuse protection for the relay server.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of different ways to skin that particular cat. So that's why I was suggesting let's move that into the threat model. But this itself doesn't sound like a core requirement at this point.
I agree.
Okay, we're fine for me.
Any other? Well, now that we've dropped this, anyone want to argue the other way? And if not, then I think we can move on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in the interest of time, I was going to move to the next one, and I agree with everything that you all are discussing.
Again,
we can probably shortcut this and say the same thing on this one.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now to this one.
Alex, do you want to explain this?
Sure. This is basically just a requirement that if multiple round trips are required, that the sender and receiver are able to communicate quickly and efficiently via those round trips. And the goal of this is there's some way that devices can know that there are new messages or webhooks or something, so that they don't have to pull the intermediary if there is one.
So this seems like a reasonable requirement, but I think that maybe that's the thing that has to get pulled in here. Because I think I think maybe I was sort of going to typing that to seem vague, and so I think like exactly the point you're making about how it has to be a notification mechanism, like that seems like the thing that ought to be pulled in here if this is a requirement.
Are you suggesting like we mentioned notifications or webhooks in this?
I think something like that. I mean, I guess what I would say is like, I mean, well, what's our underlying beef with polling? I guess it's like, is it timeliness? Is it radio bandwidth? Is it like I assume? I mean, I think those are all like valid reasons, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out like what is the like if you. I mean, I think this is a great requirement, but like when someone comes and says, okay, that's congratulations, now just poll. What are you going to say, right? And and so I think maybe like if we're trying, I guess either this is like kind of unenforceable and like I don't care, or it's like, or it needs to be tightened so that actually telling us something useful. And I don't think every requirement for the system has to be in this document, but I think if you think this is important, then we should find a way to say it that like actually we're going to refer that reflects an agreement now that we're going to do something later. Because like why would I want to build something slow? I don't want to do that, right?
Yeah. I wonder if we could say maybe just explicitly call out that we don't want to do polling as a solution. For battery and network reasons. And then if the end solution used something like sockets or HTTP keep alive, then we wouldn't need notifications or webhooks. It would just be built into the protocol.
Perhaps rather than a requirement, this can be framed as a consideration. And create a new section which might just have this as its only element of considerations as we move along.
If there is no more questions, we can move on, I guess. Okay, so that's invitation. So we want to anticipate some kind of notification, some kind of preview, so that the receiving user could understand what they are about to accept. And it doesn't really preclude any particular implementation. So if I receive an SMS, I should be able to somehow see what I want to add to my wallet.
I don't think this is necessarily around a preview, but more around what is sent over, something like SMS or email. Needs to be like a self-contained token, like a URL or a file that can then be used to initiate the transfer.
Okay.
I think it's kind of been assumed that something like that would be needed, but not specified as a requirement or assumption.
Yeah, I mean, is the requirement here that, I assume the requirement here was actually that this had to somehow like be able to kick off an app on a device, right? And so, obviously you can say like a URL for any communication channel, and you can click on that URL, right? But I mean, and this may be this is out of sort of like the usual IETF lane, but like let me give you a hypothetical. Suppose that it was just a URL and it always went to like a regular web server, and the web server fed back like something of a MIME content type, and that was the thing that kicked off the Apple Wallet or whatever. Is that an acceptable outcome? And if it's not an acceptable outcome, then then what is an acceptable outcome? I guess like what I'm trying to work out is like what do we want to say about the format of this entity? Does it have to be self-contained in that respect, or does it not have to be self-contained in that respect? And do you have to know, like, do we have to standardize what the format of it is so it properly engages whatever platform you're on? Like, I just think, like, because I understand, maybe I'm just misunderstanding, but I assumed the premise here was this was going to be, we were going to have some URL, which when you or URI or whatever, which when you clicked with it, like fired off some app on your local device, and that has to work on every possible device, since we have to specify what that interaction is. Or do I misunderstand entirely?
I suspect this also might be a candidate for a consideration session. I think another consideration here is I've heard the desire for, if you don't have an appropriate device, so if you have an Android phone that doesn't have the wallet installed, that engaging with whatever this invitation is would display some instructions about how to actually move forward with it, rather than just being a broken link. But anyway, there are a lot of trade-offs involved in that, so I suspect this might be something that would be that could be best addressed in that sort of considerations section.
I mean, just stepping in there, I think it's kind of like device flow, right? In OpenID, where sometimes you want to do it with like a type instruction to the user on the TV screen, and sometimes it's a QR code, and sometimes it's something else. Sometimes it's click this URL. There, like, I think the intention that Eric was talking about is kind of what you're going for, right? It's a simple thing that the user can interact with, but it doesn't always fulfill side of the bus requirement.
Yeah, I think it's like self-contained data which tells the recipient what kind of credential this might be, like is it a car key or is it a hotel key, something of a kind, and which will allow them to trigger the provisioning process. Whether it needs to be a requirement or consideration, I have no strong opinion.
And I think previously we had a requirement specifically around the invitation being deep linkable or somehow routable to an app on the host system that's trying to redeem it. We could look to expand this to include that, or add another consideration for that. So are the considerations like soft requirements, or things that we'd like to include in the protocol, but don't want to include them in the requirement section?
I'm thinking of them as things that we've had interesting discussions about, that we know we're going to have to make trade-offs around, but are not hard requirements for the protocol. And I'm kind of making that up on the fly right now. I wouldn't say that's a...
Yeah, so this last slide was just talking about additional considerations. I think I have written some notes about some considerations that we just discussed, so we might move, but this is just one note. We were curious what people thought. We had talked about the provisioning partner as an entity within the requirements docs, just as kind of additional context about what's happening. But I think we were unsure if people wanted that context or if it should be completely removed. So we just wanted to hear opinions on that matter, and we can adjust based on what people think.
And to add to that, we removed the requirement around provisioning partner, but we still have information to it in the background and things that mention it.
Yeah, so just in additional consideration section, we added a brief description what that could be, what different types of credential transfer could be, including a difference in key material, etc. Again, it's all based on the previous questions when initially it was out of scope and we didn't provide any information. And we are certainly open to remove that particular topic from the requirements document.
I think it's helpful to have it as context so people understand what's going on. I just don't think that the requirement is fine, but I think like this like non-normative because like, by the way, like this thing may do anything at all that it wants to do in order to get the credentials. I think it also helps to understand. I think like, I mean, I don't know where that goes. You know, document helpful to understand that. Maybe it's going to go in the final protocol document as opposed to requirements. But I think it's helpful content for people eventually because a lot, as we sort of discussed over email, a lot of the properties that you'd like the end-to-end system to have are actually provided by the provisioning partner and not provided by the protocol. And so I think hopefully people understand that there's another part of the equation that this fits in content. But like I say, you know, I mean, I'm sort of assuming this document that we are safe. Sorry, Brad says they can't hear me. I don't know why.
I wouldn't say can't hear you, but you're clipping a lot.
Yeah, Eric, it sounds better when you're closer to the microphone, seemingly. But I think that makes a lot of sense.
Or when you're yelling.
Yeah, yelling works too. Just yell at us. That works great. I think that makes a lot of sense based on this last feedback. Shall we move on to the, in the interest of time, should we move on to the threat model sections? Okay, awesome. Yeah, go for it, Brad. This is your section.
So previously, Dimitri and friends had a draft of for an individual draft for a sample implementation. In there was a threat model for that particular implementation, which is, I thought, a helpful way to think through the properties. So using that as some inspiration, tried to create a threat model for the overall protocol and being generic about it, since it doesn't, there's a bunch of bits undefined here. So want to go to the next slide. Yeah, so defined a set of threats, and then my guess at likelihood and impact for that could be attacking a pure protocol, or sorry, a protocol that purely communicated from sender to receiver without using an intermediary server, which is one flow that the requirements doc lays out. As you can see with the last one, we don't have mitigations for some of these, and some of them might not be mitigatable. And perhaps these mitigations aren't you know, fully preventing any impact here. Give you all a chance to take a read through and provide feedback. I'll also note that these were much more readable on my 30-inch monitor in full screen than they are on this Meet Echo preview.
Brother, oh,
sorry.
go ahead, James.
I was just asking, do these mitigations, do they turn into requirements if they are recognized as such?
They could. I think these are suggested mitigations for these. That if there could be other mitigations. So I think that the key requirement is to mitigate some or most of these threats.
So, I think it's important to keep track of like which of these mitigations actually fall in scope of the protocol, right? Not everything will, and the stuff that doesn't, you know, maybe that goes into an implementers section or an implementation advice or something like that. But you know, we gotta make sure that we don't get scope creep just because we've identified a threat, right? Because we can't deal with everything.
That was also my concern, because, you know, like the very first one there, you can't build that in.
It can't be part of the protocol, right? Yeah.
Right, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't go in a text section somewhere, you know, caveat.
Yeah, I feel like we're gonna have a lot of these kind of like implementation guidelines of sorts, right? Considerations.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Also welcome Any suggestions for mitigations that we didn't think of, or any threats that people foresee, either via the mailing list or here via the mailing list, or with issues and PRs on the GitHub?
Yeah, there's no mitigation for the last one. We could rely on device attestation, which Google and Apple both have on our phones, but that's a really hard thing to kind of. It's another just like try to do your best, right? Like we can't put it in the protocol, and it doesn't necessarily even solve it since it's not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the mitigation to the last one might be, as Eric mentioned in the chat, credential revocation, which is a life cycle management for the credential. And it often involves interaction with provisioning entity. In addition to that, second and third can be addressed by introducing second factor authentication during the provisioning flow. So when the transfer finalized, and now we either interact with a credential entity, and during that time, second factor might be a solution to the problem. Just my 2 cents.
Very great. If no one else has comments on these, then I think we can move on to the.
I'll just go on the queue to signify that I'm speaking as an individual. There's one thing that kind of jumps at me is that you're using RFC 21119 language in the first mitigation and not the other two. I'm wondering whether that's intentional or not. Maybe it's not, right? But you should probably kind of look at that, whether it should be a capital should in both. And also, should be noted that in the last but one, if it's a single-use credential, it might not be a mitigation at all, right? So you probably make a note that, yeah, this is a hard problem, right? And a real mitigation probably is about, correct me if I'm wrong, it's more about the UI, right? That you're trying to make it unlikely hard for the user to make a mistake. And that's a UX problem, not a protocol problem. But those were my comments.
On the first one, I think that's more of an artifact that I was copying from 2 different notes docs that I wrote on 2 different days. So that was not intentional. So thanks for catching that.
Okay.
On the second one, yes, I agree. A lot of these will wind up either being UX problems or device anti-abuse, device-side anti-abuse or server-side anti-abuse detection problems.
The threat model pieces about intermediary server.
Yep, if we can move on. So the next slide is.
We got Yogesh in the line, so.
Oh, sorry, Yogesh.
Go ahead and turn on your audio, Yogesh.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
I
can
had
hear
a
you.
question about that last. Okay, so I had a question about that last slide. Some of the threats seem to be threats to the overall system, right? Transferring credential from sender to receiver. But only some of these threats are actually pertinent to the channel that we are trying to propose. So are we trying to distinguish between threats that the channel should prevent versus the process that happens before and after?
The perspective I was taking in that was try to define all of the threats involved in this transaction from user to user. Some of those will be mitigated in general by the protocol and the communication channel. Most, I suspect, will not. But just trying to document what they are and what we are trying to mitigate and what we are not.
Okay, so not all of this will go as a requirement towards the Tigris draft.
Correct. That was my intention in writing this. Happy to take feedback if that was the right decision or not.
Thank you. Just confirm.
in the queue.
We have Eric in the queue. Eric?
Yeah, this is a different microphone. We'll see if it's better. Okay, annoying. I got the other microphone because it was supposed to sound better. Can you go to the next slide? I'm a little surprised by the second one, since I'd assumed that I was going to send a URL that had all the information in it. And so I guess I just don't understand what the deployment model is if I have a separate transmission of the encryption key and the unguessable location. Like, what is it like? What does it look like operationally? Forget about any of the the protocol. What is the user experience?
Yeah, I think I also question the practicality of this, but as it has been described to me, you would send, say, the key over SMS to your friend, and also when they arrived at the door, there would be a PIN that they could use to unlock the key, or you send the PIN over email and the invitation over SMS or something like that to have a separation between the two.
Yeah. So we're not proposing the protocol has to do that, right?
No, I don't think the protocol needs to necessarily protect against this. It's a thing that's been identified as a threat to these transfers, and how do we and we should at least think about what the possible mitigations are.
Yeah.
By the way, Leaf, you might want to mute.
So I think the only question will be whether, when we finally get to protocol design, does the protocol have to incorporate this as a feature, or does it merely have to be something you could do but that was out of scope for us? Like, for instance, well, you type it in because of provisioning server is none of your business, and other person's business or some mechanism. So I think we'll set that, this seems all fine, but when we'll have to remember this later.
Would it be helpful to add a fifth column to the draft with whether this is mitigated in protocol by the protocol or not?
Yeah, I think maybe, yeah. I mean, we'll eventually have to this will eventually have to end up in the security considerations for this document. So, yeah. Whether we do it now or later.
In the interest of time, I think we should keep moving. We have 10, 12 minutes left.
Yeah, no problem. So the next section, so that was the full review of our requirements and our threat model document. So really appreciate all the feedback there. So the next pieces were just some quick reviews of our one-pagers. So just to note, again, these were more of thought experiments, not necessarily that these are going to be our full solutions. So the 3 one-pagers we did were on WebDAV, Signal, and GSS API. I have slides for each of them, but I just wanted to maybe talk about WebDAV the most. I personally thought that this might be a really good suggestion for us. I think it actually meets a lot of our requirements. It is, very similar to what we were accomplishing with our proposed solution. And so I think that to solve this transfer protocol, we could definitely basically implement an intermediary using WebDAV and then potentially extend it to cover some of the situations we were discussing, such as potentially including push notifications, and maybe using Open Graph as well, so that users have a preview before they click on the link. So yeah, just as a whole, I think I'm certainly interested to see what others might think, but I have a feeling that it might be a really good approach for us after the requirements of threat model are solidified to kind of look at extending WebDAV as the solution for our page. For both Signal and GSS API, I think were similar and could be useful. I think for Signal, it didn't feel as directly applicable because it seemed that for Signal is anticipating you having some semblance of a user account that you base your encryption off of, and with WebDAV you don't need those like ideas of like accounts, which is just nice because then the intermediary server has like no ties about who's doing what, which I liked a lot, but it obviously would be very secure. But yeah, so I don't know. That's what I really want to talk about. Oh, Eric, I see you in the queue. Feel free to comment.
So I think these are actually answers to slightly different questions. But I think that the WebDAV one, I think, was an answer to the question. I think when Brad or I floated it was like, how do we do essentially what the original protocol did, but maybe with standardized techniques? Like when Richard and I sort of said, well, why not Signal? I think that was attempting to answer the question of why can't you just send the whole thing in one chunk, like your transport. So I think once we've conceded that we need back and forth, then I think that like Signal, like anything that looks like it smells like a messaging system is like, I mean, that's the answer to how you send the initial URL, but it's not an answer to the whole thing. And the way we've described it is that whatever channel you send the URL over has to have certain properties, which Signal would meet, or iMessage would meet, or whatever would meet, right? And I think honestly, the GSS thing, I think probably like we can just take off the table. That I think there was sort of like, I think when the people, I wasn't the person who floated it, but I think the person who floated it was kind of saying like that this whole general apparatus smells like GSS in terms of credential management, but like, and when you replace, CCC and the whole thing with GSS. And I think that like the way this is framed, which I agree with, is that the purpose of this protocol is to solve the transport requirements that these other cryptographic credentials things need. And so I think GSS is not really like a relevant consideration. So I think, it's worth exploring this question, whether WebDAV can actually get the job done. And if it does, that seems like an attractive option. And if it can't, then we need to design something else or steal something else. But I think we can probably take the other two. Probably are not really operative for the purpose of this conversation.
And you can kind of see that in our one-pagers. They don't, there's just so much that they miss, and we call that out in our one-pagers.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Eric. It makes a lot of sense that, there were suggestions about what we were trying to do, but I honestly think for me, I was writing this WebDAV one-pager, and it did feel like, while we're having discussions with requirements and talking about WebDAV did actually seem like it fit a lot of our requirements. So I think as you sent out in the email, this would be like the next step after our requirements and threat model documents are adopted. But I think it would be potentially a really good option for this working group. So I don't know. I appreciated all the feedback because I had not even heard of WebDAV. And if we had known about it before, maybe we would have just done this from the get-go. But yeah, that's kind of all we did for the one-pagers. It's not, these documents don't have to be adopted by the working group or anything like that. They're just very helpful for us to discuss it, how it would work with our use cases and requirements.
It definitely looks like a very good base for this solution, but some extension need to be added to address certain aspects that we listed before.
Yeah.
To the chairs, I'd like to suggest that the requirement doc and the threat model doc could be adopted by the group and do that call on the list.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think maybe it's time to do that. And the question is whether we do it in the before or at the 116 timeline. But me and Prachi will talk to the ADs about that. And yeah, it will definitely be a call on the list either way, because I don't think there will be enough people in Yokohama to have get a sense of the room there. I know that you guys won't be able to travel to Yokohama, so we'll definitely do all of that on the list.
Yeah, and we'll address the feedback we've gotten. I wrote it all down, so we'll address that after this call, hopefully, within the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and if we can get that revved onto the list, I think that's kind of a good place to kind of. That's a good. My feeling is that this has now gotten quite a bit of feedback, even though there are a few people who have sort of provided feedback. It's still a lot of seniority going into all of this review, so I'm kind of comfortable. So we'll see if the working group agrees.
Yeah, and just before you leave and Prachi finish up, I just want to say thank you all for joining, and we really appreciate all the feedback. I know it takes time to review all these documents, and we were creating a lot, so certainly appreciate all the help from the working group in the email threads.
Indeed, very well said. So yeah, Casey. So yes, we are getting kicked out of here on the dot, right? That's how Meet Echo for interim meetings work. So this is your last 5 minutes for raising any other issues. Otherwise, we'll see you all in Yokohama, virtually at least.
Thank you, everyone. This was a great session.
No. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all. Thanks.